again, as we see with this visit today from the president, maybe there has been a change of heart in the world because Ukrainians have proved something, after almost 365 days of war. It's easy to kind of get scared about what Putin might do in the Kremlin, but it's also possible that Putin can be scared, and especially when the West stands together.
Welcome to Ukraine Bank.
Let's go to Ukraine and check in with Joseph Lindsley. And Joe, based on our conversations with you for the past almost a year now, I fully expect you to tell me that you had a brief moment with President Biden in Kyiv this morning.
I was waiting for you to say that today, Bob. Good afternoon. No, I am in Kharkiv, 30 miles to Russia. But still, it's quite extraordinary, and everyone's feeling the emotions from this, that the president of the United States was in Kyiv today. In fact, his visit to the Ukrainian capital occurred just as the air raid alarms began to sound in every single oblast or province of Ukraine. Right at that very moment, as the alarms wailed, President Biden was walking the streets of Kyiv with President Zelenskiy. He was laying a wreath at St. Michael's Golden-Dome Monastery. And that monastery, as we've talked about before, was a key site of the 2014 protests that became the Revolution of Dignity, which the end days of that revolution were 9 years ago from this week. And so there's a lot of significance to these moments coming together. This week also we'll have the 1 year anniversary of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Even though we had nationwide air alarms for a couple of hours while President Biden was here, I think every single person here on Ukrainian soil knew that there was no threat of missile attack at that moment. Reportedly, those alarms were because there was aircraft over Belarus. Obviously, Russia was probably trying to send some kind of signal, but I think they did not dare fire a single missile into Ukrainian territory. Of course, it was continued shelling and battles in the east and south, but no major missiles flying with the United States president here. And I think if you look at this, it's a confidence-boosting visit during a week, coming up into this week, as we've discussed a lot on the program last week. There was a lot of trepidation about what might happen this week. What is Russia going to do as the 1 year anniversary of this full-scale war approaches? And I think here we see maybe a reminder that it's easy to kind of get scared about what Putin might do in the Kremlin, but it's also possible that Putin can be scared, and especially when the West stands together. And when Boris Johnson, he was one of the first foreign leaders to come to Kyiv. It required a lot of courage because it was much more dangerous back then. And I think that visit of Boris Johnson when he was prime minister was the beginning of the momentum that led to today's visit with President Biden. And because of the security position of the president and the importance of the United States, there's no way that such a visit could happen if there was not absolute confidence that Russia would not take advantage of that moment. I mean, think of even when U.S. presidents have, when they went to Afghanistan for Thanksgiving or some surprise visit, we never knew about those visits until after they were home or on the way home. So it really is remarkable that in real time, the world knew that President Biden was here and that he gave that speech, I think remarkable speech in Kyiv today. And a few interesting things that he said. He said that Ukraine has been succeeding. President Biden said, Ukraine has been succeeding beyond all and every expectation except your own. And I thought it was powerful how he recognized that in those early days of the war, most people thought there was no chance for the Ukrainians, but the Ukrainians knew that they could succeed. And President Biden recognized that today. He also noted that people are fleeing from Russia, not just from the military, but because it's a society with no future. And this is very different from what, say, President Macron of France said a couple of days ago, that we need to continue to work with Russia. And then just one maybe question about it. At the very end of his speech, President Biden said that this war, this is very difficult and it could go on for weeks, months, or years. And so I do think that the question remains behind all the trappings, do Washington and the free world want a quick victory? That question still remains. But we do certainly see from this visit today a new level of confidence in what has been a very scary time.
Joseph, do you think that part of Putin's strategy is to prolong this war as long as possible, banking on support waning from the West?
For sure. And I think that in many ways, I think in order to get to this point of this visit today from the American president, the Ukrainians really had to prove themselves. It was a whole year for this to happen. and so quite a test. And in some ways, I think sometimes people in the West might be a little bit glib. Oh, like even with this visit today on Ukrainian social media, and Americans on social media are saying, "Oh, Putin must be very scared today," and certainly it sends a powerful signal. But I think if you look at and as President Biden kind of alluded to in his speech, Russia is a society that was going nowhere. It's sort of a society of destruction. And the war on Ukraine is giving Putin some purpose in his country. And I think we have to remember that. That's that he might actually be enjoying, being the pariah of the world, given his psychology and psyche. And so we can never be too complacent about that. But I think this, when the 9 years ago this week, the Ukrainian people were demonstrating in the streets, and against all odds, the pro-Putin totalitarian regime fled. They were terrified of the people, and back then, that was 2 months later, Moscow, Putin took the Crimean Peninsula from Ukraine, and Biden was vice president. President Obama, and the Obama-Biden administration did nothing when Putin took Crimea, and in fact, Joe Biden's son ended up working for a member of the regime that the Ukrainian people kicked out of their country. A company called Burisma that benefited from Moscow taking Crimea. And I think you can see, though, how this war maybe has changed a lot of people. And you see that on every level of the war, how people, you sort of rise to the moment. And I saw that in President Biden's speech. And he said when he first spoke to President Zelenskiy in the first few hours of the war, Zelensky was telling him he could hear the bombs, from the presidential residence. And President Biden said he'll never forget that. And so I think that we maybe are seeing an awakening and maybe a response to President Zelenskyy's speech in London saying we don't have to live, in a world where we're always afraid of tyrants. And so maybe we're seeing some kind of change. And that is maybe perhaps today's visit is a sign of a new view on how free people can live in the world.
It's a fascinating and complicated history. When I was looking at the video of President Biden and President Zelenskiy in Kyiv, standing in front of that beautiful church with the golden domes, I kept thinking, God, I hope the Russians don't bomb this structure. Aren't you fearful of something like that?
Well, and interesting to note because actually the Soviet Russians destroyed that structure because they outlawed, they were from much of the history of the Soviet Union, they outlawed religion. So that structure was rebuilt when it was 1,000 years old, but it's totally rebuilt in the 1990s when Ukraine got its independence. But I think, no, and I felt that, in fact, I went running during the air alarm when I knew President Biden was speaking here. I think everyone had complete confidence, and that's what such a visit does. It shows that no one for a second thought there's any way that the Kremlin would take any action against Ukraine while the president of the United States was here. And I think that really does show that if the West stands together, if free countries around the world stand together, victory is possible. I think it really is a momentous occasion, and maybe it will start making people a little bit less afraid of the Kremlin.
Joe, I'll leave you with this, and I think you'll get a kick out of it. I want to share this text with you from a listener. Recently at Rod Stewart's shows in Florida, he dedicated Rhythm of My Heart to Ukraine, a very moving part of the concert. I thought I would share this, and hopefully, Bob, you can send this along to Joseph. And there's a picture of Rod Stewart on stage, and on the video screen, a big picture of President Zelensky. And then this listener says, the F word and Russians were used together in Rod Stewart's introduction of the song. And that's from Jim. So I wanted to share that with you, Joseph.
Well, even as Ukrainians don't like to swear, so even little kids in Ukrainian will use will speak like that. But I appreciate that text, and I think the rhythm of the heart, and maybe again as we see with this visit today from the president, maybe there has been a change of heart in the world because Ukrainians have proved something. After almost 365 days of war, maybe we're seeing. Maybe this upcoming year is going to be one of optimism and some new type of vision.
We can only hope. Until tomorrow, be safe, Joseph.
Thank you, Bob.
Joseph Lindsley, world's most interesting man.
This I find in my garden. It's piece from rocket.
Thank you for introducing Ukraine on your social media pages.
Що сказав?
Ukraine.